Hi, I'm Courtney Clark. I'm here with Chad Blevins, who is a speaker from USAID's GeoCenter, another fantastic speaker who's part of our virtual internship professional development sessions. Um, Chad works on OpenStreetMap initiatives along with some other things over at the GeoCenter and has had a really exciting career as a GIS analyst. So he's going to speak to us a little bit about that career, give tips for how students can start working now to develop a career in GIS or international development and working at USAID. And then we'll open up the floor for questions. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to you, Chad.
Thank you, Courtney, and hello everyone that I can't see. My name is Chad Blevins. I work at the USAID GeoCenter, where I have been an analyst for the past 3 years. I guess I can go back in time here to the beginning of my professional career, which started in 2000, I guess right when I was graduating from undergrad. I had a degree in geography, and back then, we weren't quite making maps with pen and paper, but GIS was sort of a developing technology at the time. It was very specialized, not nearly as widespread as it is today. We were talking in the world of megabytes of data, not gigabytes of data. The internet was, about more or less 10 years old, commercial internet, thereabouts. So a lot of the technologies and tools that you have access to now weren't even close to being a reality back then. That said, so I started my first job out of college, was working at the U.S. Geological Survey headquarters in Reston. So I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I have been for the last, since I started working. So I've had a lot of access to government agencies, and there's a pretty robust GIS job market in this area. There's certain cities. Can you still hear me? Hello? You still there?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure what happened. It kicked me off the call for a minute, but
okay, I wasn't sure. So there's certain cities in places in the U.S. that are better to land a GIS job. It's just easier. There's more jobs available. But I think as time goes on, we're seeing GIS jobs pop up in more areas. Obviously, international development in GIS, well, that's even a more specialized job that you could find. And, DC has lots of them, but there are some other cities, especially out west, where more jobs relating to two are popping up. So I worked at the survey for a little bit, got a good understanding, or at least that was my introduction to the government and how the government worked. Got to work on some interesting projects there, globally, doing coal and petroleum assessments throughout the world. Then, it was a contract position that ended right about the time the U.S. was entering Afghanistan, and I worked in the intelligence community for a while after that. That provided me a very strong foundation of, the basics of GIS. I think right about, or in that time, Google Earth was coming about, so you saw more of these open tools developing. The smartphone was invented, so now everyone has a map in their pocket. OpenStreetMap became a reality. So there was lots of changes in those years that I spent as an Intel analyst, and I got a very strong background in remote sensing and imagery at that job. And I do think that oftentimes in the GIS field, everyone focuses on GIS and ArcMap and using the vector data, but there's this whole other side to it, which really delves into the scientific realm a little bit more with imagery and image processing. And you know, and the reality is a lot of the vector data that we use today has been derived from imagery. As you know, it's either hand created from imagery, similar to what you've done in OpenStreetMap, or there are ways to automatically process remotely sensed data to extract certain features from the image. So if you're looking for deforestation, change detection, landslides, those types of things. And I've always had a background, you know, always had an interest working internationally, and I had a background in emergency response, volunteering at my local fire department here in Vienna, the town in which I live. And those skills combined with my GIS and remote sensing skills, I applied for a job working at USAID's Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. And that was back in 2008. I was hired with them, and I got to work for OFDA for, I guess I was there for a little over 4 years, worked on lots of major international disasters, the Haiti earthquake, the Japan earthquake, tsunami, nuclear spill. I worked on the drought in the Horn of Africa in 2011. There was a variety of large-scale disasters that I was able to respond to. And right about that time is when OpenStreetMap was really becoming, and open data in general was becoming more of a reality. And so here's this thing, this open map of the world that's there, and you know, how can it be used in parts of the world that don't have any geographic data? And how can we, you know, at this point, people are using GPSs when they go out into the field, and they're using smartphones regularly in their lives. So equipping them with that geospatial data that they need that can help support their jobs, you know, was a need that was identified, and it was a need that the volunteer community was responding to. So I worked at OFDA for a number of years, and then about 3 years ago I joined the GeoCenter, and during that time, you know, I had developed a rapport with the OpenStreetMap community and had worked on a number of projects enough to where I took those skills with me to work on more development-related projects. So stepping away from that immediate disaster response and figuring out ways to, you know, if we can create this data really quickly after an earthquake or a tsunami, then, you know, how can we strategically plan and support development projects in health or agriculture or even disaster planning, and use the group of volunteers we have out there to help with this style of project. And I created a program at the GeoCenter called Mapping for Resilience, and that program was initially started working with George Washington University in DC, and we worked with their students every semester, and we gave them a task that was related to a USAID development challenge, and they would create the data that we needed, and then those USAID partners could then use that information to help inform decisions. I did that for a couple of years, and it built up momentum, and the USAID GeoCenter now has the Youth Mappers University Consortium that consists of George Washington University, Texas Tech, and West Virginia. And so those three schools are the founding members of Youth Mappers, youthmappers.org. And Youth Mappers is the way for the GeoCenter to scale our Mapping for Resilience program. And in the meantime, I've also made some connections with, you know, Courtney and the World Bank and other groups that are out there working in similar countries, mapping similar features as we are. And that is where, in a couple weeks, Courtney and I will be in Mozambique training Peace Corps volunteers to create data for a malaria prevention project in the Zambezi province. So that's sort of in a nutshell how I came to be here speaking to you today. And yeah, I can, do you need a further explanation?
No, I think that's great. Thank you so much, Chad. We did have a few questions, and remember as well, if you're watching live, you can submit questions through Slack. I have that open right now, and you can also use that blue Q&A button on the Google Hangout to ask your questions. So the first question comes from Stephen, one of our virtual interns, who's wondering how you feel, Chad, the GeoCenter at USAID could help in dealing with the crisis in Syria.
Okay, that's an interesting question. And I guess I can first frame that by a couple ways I can approach that question. One is that the way that USAID is structured, responding to the crisis in Syria that's really falls into the work stream that the DACHA Bureau, Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance, responds to. So they respond to complex emergencies such as what we're seeing in Syria, and that is the agency's lead for responding to those types of events. But that said, the GeoCenter currently is not doing anything in Syria. The Middle East Bureau at USAID also has a GIS analyst, and he is doing some work to support that. I'm not exactly sure what projects he's working on at the moment, but I do know that when possible and when asked, we are coordinating some of the resources and efforts that the GeoCenter has to help support those response activities. So if that comes, either with providing satellite imagery to USAID partners on the ground who could use it to verify some of the work that they're doing, we've done that. We've provided ArcGIS Online accounts to various people, allowing them to display and analyze geospatial data and distribute that to the disaster assistance response team, which is in the field in Turkey right now, or the response management team, which is based in DC. So we've provided them with some tools and technology there. And we've also coordinated with other government agencies to help corral bits of information that they need that can be useful to help support the response.
Awesome, thank you. And then Mediha would like to know, what sort of initiatives or programs have been created in developing countries as a result of the work that you or the GeoCenter has done. So I know you mentioned mapping for resilience, and I think you all have had or are building partnerships, for example, with universities in developing countries to get more involved with OpenStreetMap. So maybe you could talk about that, or if you have any other examples of really cool programs that have come out of the work that USAID has done around mapping overseas.
Yeah, sure. I think I have sort of a two-part question to that. Yeah, one is the OpenStreetMap work that Courtney was alluding to. As I mentioned, Mapping for Resilience is right about 3 years old. We came up with the name maybe a year and a half ago. The first year and a half, we were just figuring out what it actually was. But within the last couple years, we have worked with a local university in Bangladesh, Pune University, in the south western portion of the country, which also happens to be in a USAID Feed the Future zone, which is an area that USAID is focusing on to help increase agriculture yields that benefit both the farmer and the country. So we worked with some students there. We gave them a training in OpenStreetMap. We're helping them, sort of going back and forth right now, helping the teachers integrate that more mainstream into their curriculum. We introduced the university to some of the USAID implementing partners, and that's sort of the one of the ways that we envision mapping for resilience working is we take these university students in a developing country, we give them a real development challenge in their country to work on, and then we, while doing that, we put them in touch with staff at the USAID mission, which does have a lot of local people working there as well, foreign service nationals, as well as the USAID implementing partners, so the contractors that we're contracting to do that work, whether it be, you know, research a certain type of rice that's going to grow better in this area, or help farmers with a more sustainable aquaculture in that part of the world, fish and shrimp are pretty much the high dollar crops, you know, give them more sustainable techniques to grow these high dollar crops. So we're trying to put the students in touch with the partners and kind of create those connections that can hopefully turn into something more once we leave. And then another way that we're directly benefiting, you know, the countries is by tapping into the existing geospatial community. So USAID has a presence in about 100 countries worldwide, and about 25% of those countries we have GIS specialists embedded within the mission. So the majority of those are, like I said, foreign service nationals. They're natives of the country. They know the language. They know the culture. They know the development challenges. So, you know, they're hired on at the mission. They stay there. Usually, you know, we've had people there over a decade. And if you're there for long enough, you can really build a rapport with the different teams at the mission, and you can integrate in with the government's geospatial capacity. You can develop relationships with those implementing partners on the ground, and just kind of continue to build on the work that's being done there already.
Awesome, thank you. So I know that it can be very competitive to find employment with USAID or even your implementing partners. Do you have any tips, a little bit more generally, just about what students can be doing to prepare, you know, if they do want that job at USAID at some point? How can they make themselves like the most competitive candidates possible? And then a follow-up to that would be, what do you love about working at USAID, and what is a challenge working at USAID?
Okay. So the first part of the question was, that was a long question. Can you just repeat the
tips for making yourself a competitive,
more marketable? Okay, okay. Yeah, you know, that's a tough question. Especially in this market, and GIS is changing very rapidly, but I think one of the things that employers will look for is experience. You know, if you have the opportunity to work on a project overseas, whether it be, you know, actually going to that country and working, or doing it remotely from the US, such as, you know, that can be done through OpenStreetMap, I think that's important. Having a diverse background and skills is also very important. So you want to know the Esri, ArcMap, GIS solutions that are out there, but you also want to know some more of the open source technology that's, you know, coming about at this stage in the game. GIS now is sort of this all-encompassing art, and it includes some people with computer science backgrounds. It includes people with more design, visualization backgrounds, so knowing some basic web programming and web skills. I think website development skills, that's very important. If you knew any Python scripting or any scripting languages like that, I think Python would be a good one to learn. That's something that came out well after I started my career, and I don't know any Python scripting. It's not necessarily a good thing for me. but having some background in that. If you know any like R or RStudio or SPSS, or having some basic background in stats, and if you don't know how to push the buttons of the software, at least being able to speak intelligently about looking at these larger databases and thinking of different ways that you can crunch figures and look at figures, because spatial statistics is a big part of the field. And I think, as you always hear, there's this big data revolution going on. So the more ability that you have to touch and manipulate different types of data, the better you'll be, the better your chances will be at landing a job.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really helpful. And then the follow-up to that, just what do you love about working for USAID, and then what is like a challenge or maybe something you don't love so much?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I generally love working at USAID. I can't say that I'm unhappy there at all. It's the type of job you wake up in the morning that you want to go to. I love the people I work with. Carrie Stokes, the geographer at USAID, is one of the most wonderful people I've ever worked with in my life. Her deputy, Michael Crino, is also probably the second best person I've ever worked for in my life. So at this point, I feel very fortunate to be in this position and have the job that I have. Some of the challenges at working at USAID is, when you're working for an international development agency, you're day in and day out presented with these challenges that face the world, like the Syria crisis, or, a drought in Ethiopia, or, just generally, flooding and disaster and resilience and health, malaria, mosquitoes. I mean, you name it. It's a big world out there, and there's a lot of challenges that the people are facing. And you only have, as one person, you can only do so much. So in a way, you have to sort of decide, what projects take precedence, which are most important, which do you think that you're going to be able to help. It's almost like triage. And back when I'd done my training in emergency response training with the firehouse, it's like you show up to a big disaster and you've got to make those decisions in your head. It's like, all right, I'm only one person with two hands, and, who can I help? Who can wait? Who can I help? Right? And that's the same thing at USAID. You have all these challenges, so you have to sort of make the decisions of where to put your energy, because if we could all work around the clock 24/7, I think we would. But at some point, that work-life balance is important. And, especially in the time of a big disaster, since I did work for OFDA and I am part of the humanitarian OpenStreetMap community, I do tend to get pulled into these larger responses. And I played a role in that Nepal earthquake response. And that was one of those things. And, 5 or 6 days into it, you're sleeping 4 hours a night, and then you got to level with yourself and say, hey, this has gotten to be too much. I need to take a day off and come back tomorrow, and I'll be more help to the people that need it.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really good point. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I think those are all of the questions that we had submitted from the interns. So do you have anything else to add? Otherwise, we can wrap this up.
I don't, no, but thank you for having me. And I think the virtual intern that program that you're enrolled in now is a really good way to sort of get your foot in the door and get that experience that I was talking about. And I am actively pursuing the GeoCenter to pick up some virtual interns next year. So there may be some openings available there, but the best of luck to you and landing a job in GIS and international development. I will tell you that the field is rapidly growing. When I first started at USAID in 2008, there was working for OFDA. OFDA had 4 GIS specialists, and the Office of Transition Initiatives had 2, and there was no GeoCenter, and there was maybe a half a dozen missions throughout the world that had GIS people. Now the GeoCenter is at USAID. There's 20 people there. OTI has a team of 8. OFTA has 5. And we have about 25 GIS specialists throughout the world. And there's also now an embedded GIS person in global health, Bureau of Food Security, Middle East Bureau, and it just keeps growing. So I think that you all will have a better chance of landing a job in this field. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks so much for your time, Chad. It was great to hear from you. And to all of our virtual interns, I will be sure to share links to those potential USAID virtual internship positions if they become available. All right, so with that, we'll sign off, and thanks again, Chad.
Thank you. Bye-bye.